Your parental leave policy means nothing if your culture punishes people for using it. Our Spark Effect research reveals a 40-point trust gap between organizations that handle disruption effectively and those that handle it poorly. In Parenthood, that's where employees discover if we support working parents is real or just more corporate propaganda. Mason, Donovan, and Mark Kaplan's new book, The Parenthood Advantage, makes the case that parents develop the exact skills companies desperately need. But here's the trust reality. If you can't support parents through the transition, you'll never capture that advantage. You'll just break trust and lose talent. And the companies winning on both, well, they understand that supporting parents isn't just good for families, it's how you build the kind of trust that becomes your competitive moat. I'm Kim Bohr, President and COO of Spark Effect and host of the Courage to Advance podcast. Today's authors, Mason, Donovan, and Mark Kaplan, join me to discuss how working parents can navigate this transition with confidence and how organizations can turn it into their most powerful trust-building moment. We have a lot to discuss, so let's dive in. Mason and Mark, welcome to Courage to Advance podcast.
Hey, thank you for having us, Kim.
Thanks, Kim.
I'm so excited to be in this conversation with both of you. And all three of us being parents, I'm very curious, why did you write The Parenthood Advantage?
It's a good question we get quite often. So our business, our former business, the 𝗀𝗶𝗵𝗵 Group, works on, we work with large corporations doing employee engagement, wellness, and focusing on inclusion. And this work, where we think about parents, so there's so many more of those dynamics that happen when you're parenting, gender dynamics and age and class and you name it. And then also wellness is so much a part of the parenthood sort of journey that this was the intersection of those two, of both inclusion and wellness. And we talked about this a lot in our work and our leadership development work within the 𝗀𝗶𝗵 Group. And it is a conversation where we always talk about parenting, always came in from one issue or another, whether it's a wellness or inclusion issue, parents and non-parents. And then it's one of those things in which and I'm sure you went through this, Kim, is people can tell you what it's like being a parent, but until you actually experience it, you don't fully know. There is no way of knowing. And we became parents about 1.5 years ago, and our son was born 6 weeks early. I'm a type A personality. I had everything planned, right? So I had everything lined out. I was even the baby bags packed like 2 months in advance, and I had everything worked out for the next 6 months. But unfortunately, Mother Nature doesn't really go to type A plans. And so he was born 6 weeks early, way earlier than we thought or expected. And we found ourselves in the NICU. They allowed us in there from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We were there from 8:15 to 8:15. And those 12 hours. And then at the end, we still had a business. We still ran a business. We still had consultants managing. We still had workshops with clients going on and coaching and you name it. And starting to realize what it's like to be a parent and to maintain a job. And going through this, because it's emotionally challenging having a child. It's so much joy. And when you're in the NICU, it's so much joy and also so much trepidation, because every beep or the sound of an oxygen tube, it's always like a fear and joy at the same time, going back and forth. So you're so drained at the end of the day, but you still have to keep up work. And as we started talking to people in the waiting room, other parents that had the same stories as being employees, some getting paid, some not getting paid to go on leave, some really fighting with the manager to have the support. And then we started talking to our clients and realized, wow, there is a lot of stories around this in which corporations are not or just don't know how to support parents. And again, it's the intersection of those two fields we're already working with. So we just started digging into it, and we did a couple hundred interviews, some impromptu and some in person. If you're in a grocery store or we saw you in line at waiting at a restaurant, and we heard somehow that you just became a parent, about to become a parent, we accosted you, and luckily nobody turned us back. And we had these conversations, and sort of and some very rich and some just quick stories. And realize there's such a need here. There's such a need. So we took our work, we did a lot of the research out there, and we're blessed that there's so much studies and stats out there what happens to parents and how they connect with work. That's where we got to, and that's where we started along this road. And we started about a year ago, not really started the idea during our fourth trimester. And then it just blossoms from there. So we're excited about this conversation.
I think it's so fascinating. Before we have children, we think we have a certain ideal around what it's like to have children. And then we have children and we're completely humbled. I know my husband and I were on what all goes in and how we're perceived in a workplace and how much more challenging it is when you have this little human that all of a sudden you're trying to figure out, right? And it's just not what it's just so different from what we think it is before.
It is.
So Mark, in going through this work with Mason and the research you all did, what kind of surprised you about some of what you were finding?
Gosh, there were so many things that got my attention as we interviewed people. I mean, there's very few things in life that really change you, right? I think we often think that I'll do this, I'll change. Parenthood changes people. And I've experienced that myself. I know Mason has. And the people we interviewed, like just hearing the stories, how personal this is and how much how the companies responded to them, how personal it was and how important it was. And, we heard people talk about how they really had gone through an evolution. And, in the book, we talk about how that translates into workplace skills, right? Those sorts of experiences, and I know we'll probably talk about this later as parents, that translates into what happens at work. So I was really struck by how transformative parenthood really is when you start to experience it and then talk to other people and their experiences.
And Mason, you all through that research, there's a tremendous amount of statistics that I was surprised to hear that were not always so wonderful that you uncovered. And also just so much of the workplace biases that are, really embedded in those statistics. Can you talk a little bit about some of those that surfaced and how that kind of informed what you really wanted this book to communicate?
Yeah, you're right. I was surprised by how much research there was out there. Research on, the fatherhood bonus and the motherhood penalty, whereas women tend to have a 4% ding to their income, a lower income per child, whereas men tend to have a 6% increase. So that's the fatherhood bonus, motherhood penalty. But one of the questions we ask everybody interview, regardless of where you interview, is, do you think that becoming a parent made you a better employee? And every single person said yes. Every single person had I'm more empathetic. I am better at time management. My project management skills are going through the roof. My resiliency is so much higher now. My, team management is better. Conflict management is better. And there's so many of those. And then there's studies out there that prove that, right? So there's studies that have gone out there, academic studies, and looked at the prior women that did not, they focus a lot on women, women who did not have children and those who did, and focusing on sort of the skill sets of one towards the other, and finding that women who had children have some of those higher skills we talked about, which is the project management, empathy, but also there's neuroscience out there. It's showing there's literally changes to the brain to both mother and father. So it's not just because the mother gave birth. Even if you adopt a child and there's no physical birth, there is physical changes to your brain that happen when you become a parent. We have a whole chapter devoted to identity shift of who you are and who you see yourself as, and how that starts to really shape your behavior and shape what you do. Quick example, I think everybody that had a child can think about this. Before they had a child and they're in the car and somebody cut them off, they might have said some choice words, right, in the car, or done something. Maybe they sped up a little bit more, tagged them. But when there's a child in the back, you start and you filter yourself and you realize, well, I don't need to do that. I'm a role model, right? I need to be the role model to who's sitting in the back seat.
Yeah.
Little things like that start to translate in work, because when you think as a leader, a lot of times leaders forget they are role models. What they say and what they do, how they act really reflects how everybody else reflects upon those role models. These skills and these characteristics, behaviors, they can, if you allow it, and if you think about it, they can very easily transition into your workplace and just make you a better employee and a better leader. Absolutely.
Mark, what would you add?
A very close friend of mine was telling her sister about this book, and her sister has 3 kids, right? And so her sister says, I'm so glad. I'm really glad they're writing this book. And then she says to her, she says, but isn't it obvious? Like, isn't some of this obvious? And so what I believe about that is that at one level it is. It makes total sense, right? It's intuitive. But apparently not enough organizations, it's not obvious enough to enough organizations, right?
Right.
And part of what we're doing in this book is we're trying to flip the sort of way that organizations think about this, because traditionally, and I think to some extent even on autopilot, back of the brain stuff, companies think of this as a problem that they have to manage, right? It's like people are going to have kids. 80% of people, by the way, have a child while they're employed at some point in their career. So they think we have to manage this problem. It's the woman and the career, and she's not going to be as committed to work, and she's probably going to want to leave. And what we're saying is, wait a minute, you need to think about the opportunity side of this equation, because if you can work with your employees, if you can put in the right kinds of practices and policies, create the right kind of support, what you really get is you get an employee who's going to be stickier in terms of turnover, who's going to be more skilled, going to be more committed. And it's really a win-win. And if we throw in the children themselves, it's really a win-win-win. And we just need to get companies to flip how they think about this. And that's probably the main purpose of the book, is to just change that thought process.
I cannot agree more. One of the things that was very aligned into this conversation that we did at Spark Effect was we wanted to understand how disruption was impacting organizations. And when we thought about disruption, originally we were thinking, well, this AI tech revolution. And then we pulled back and we said, well, actually, there's personal and professional disruptions happening all the time, of which parenthood, elder care, family emergency is some of those areas. And so we wanted to look at how did that impact trust? And I think what you're describing is people on the surface would say things like, well, isn't it obvious that trust would be impacted or broken if somebody didn't follow what they said they were going to do? We started to find a whole much more nuanced story that tied to real business impact, much like what you two did through this research of finding that what we think intuitively is actually perhaps not the full story. And we're not then taking advantage of the full opportunity that the talents of parents actually can bring into the organization. So just a couple of things that we talked about that surfaced in our report that I'd love to talk about how this relates to your book is we saw there were 3 big trust destroyers, of which 2 that are relevant to our conversation include lack of transparency around uncertainty or trade-offs. And the second was perceived misalignment between leadership decisions and employee needs. Mason, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about where some of that research was coming in and finding, and how where perhaps organizations of the policies and things they have set just really aren't aligned and are more setting themselves up to be a destroyer of trust versus a support to these employees that are parents.
Yeah, it's so true. And I love the study you've done on trust. It's something we're going to leverage as well. You look at the dissonance between what the policies that's there and the actual culture. It's huge. There is a big gap. So, for example, as companies trying to become more supportive of parents in general, of both the father and the mother, they're providing more leave to the father. So they're providing sometimes equal leave to the father as they do the mother, or they decide for a primary caregiver leave in which the mother or father can choose who's the primary caregiver and get that longer leave period. But so here's the dissonance. They offer in policy, but men are not supposed to take it. Not supposed to take, and we hear story after story in which when the father decides he wants to take the full leave, that they look at him like, really? And thinking, you're not committed anymore? Do you not like it here? Is there, are you not looking to progress your future anymore? I can give you a quick story that I heard a few weeks ago at my dermatologist. I was talking to her about the book, and the dermatologist said, oh yeah, we have a 6-month-old son, and my wife worked for our private equity firm. And while she was on the call with one of the executives of this private equity, He says, well, where's Chris? And now this is a Friday. And she told him, oh, Chris just had a baby. And Chris had a baby on Wednesday, 2 days prior. But the executive says, well, Chris didn't have a baby. His wife did. So why isn't he on the call? That's the thinking, right?
Yep.
That's the thinking. So and she decided right then, it wasn't against her, but she came home and she told her husband, I don't want to work for this firm anymore. Yeah. It's those things in which there's a big gap in trust when we say, hey, we want you to do this. They say everything they want you to do, but when it comes to practice, we don't actually want to fulfill. Here's another one that has nothing to do with Parenthood, but a lot of companies offer is the unlimited, a lot of equity firms, own firms, the unlimited vacation leave. Unlimited. So great, I can take months. You can't. I think, Kim, you work for an organization that had unlimited leave. I did as well. You were never supposed to take more than a week. I mean, just culturally, you just didn't do it. Or you would be sort of written off, even though it said unlimited vacation leave that you had on it. And there's a lot of firms out there that have that. So there's that dissonance of what is written and what's acceptable. And there's a lot of lost trust there, right? Because they're not aligned. And there's a reason they're not aligned. One is that we just want to look good, but we actually don't want to fulfill to be good. And that's where there's a big trust gap.
If I can add to that, it's one of the things you learn as a parent. Unclear boundaries tend to not work very well, Right. And when organizations have unclear boundaries or unclear practices, it tends to not work well. And because you talked about transparency, Kim, also is one of the aspects around trust. And so one of the things that we're advocating, because we don't see it enough, is that when a parent is expecting, there's a process that they tell their manager. And then there's a process that kicks in place that is mandatory, right? For the manager of that employee and that employee to get together and have a planning process that starts as soon as possible. And so that we take all these assumptions that people are making, right? You go and you tell your boss, what the research shows, by the way, is that men tell immediately and women are really nervous about it, right? And
absolutely.
And I would think you're nervous about it because you don't know what assumptions are in the back of someone's brain, even if they're really well-intended, how they're going to show up. So we believe that this process in organizations should be planned, it should be explicit, it should be mandatory, and we think that's a way to create more trust because it creates more information and more communication, creates more trust throughout the transition or transformation, you could really speak of it as. So I think that's really important when it comes to parenting and trust.
It's tremendous. What stood out to me as you were saying that, Mark, was I could relate to that sentiment of delaying in sharing the news because, well, you're not committed enough. Well, there goes the path we thought we might want to put you down. And some of that was actually, stated to me and others I have talked to. And so I think that is a real concern. So you all talk about kind of 4 stages, if you will, that I think would be really great to share with the listeners around how we move through in this journey. And I think trying to understand then how do we also set an organization's, your leaders kind of at the right mindset when you start to bring in this information is really important. And so talk a little bit about a little more about what you're trying to recommend.
We put in the book 3 stages: nesting, the 4th trimester, and returnship. So nesting is those 3 to 4 months prior to leave. That's typically when women, somewhere between the 3rd month and the 6th month, typically when women are telling their manager that they're expecting, going to have a child. Men do it, as Mark said, a lot sooner. They might even tell them on the 1st month because we're just excited. Isn't it wonderful to be excited and tell your manager, but isn't it horrible to be excited and feel like you can't tell your manager of what that
very much so,
how that will affect your career? So the book's written for both the corporate manager and the working parent, the expectant working parent. And we provide a really good outline. We talk about developmental journey. We talk about specifically about logistics, what you should be doing. And some of us will be blessed with good managers. A handful of us will be blessed with having good companies. There's very few companies that have a fully supportive structure in place. And otherwise, it's kind of a gamble with a good manager in this or not. And then most of us won't, right? So most of us, they're in work. Well, and this is what you need to do. As much as we say you need to own your career, you need to own your leave. So that means in that nesting phase, that's all about transition. So this is about how am I going to leave? How am I going to make sure I have a plan in place? And we work with companies to get those plans in place. And so they don't just say, the manager just say, go to HR, and HR signed you up for the forms to take leave and nothing else. But they actually have a discussion plan. We talk about communications while you're on leave. We talk about transition. But most importantly, we talk about your returning. And we talk about how do you look at this is going to progress your career. We tried to switch to have that paradigm shift of thinking, oh, this is going to make you less an employee. And, oh, wow, you're going to come back with so many more skills that we want to leverage. And nobody with a child wants to hop from job to job. So it's a great chance that you, by far greater tenure, if we support you and we keep in their first year. Now, companies who do fully support, and those handful we talked about before, they've shown that they can keep the employee over that first year 100%. 100% of those come back and stay for at least the first year. Majority, 1/3 of employees now already thinking about leaving while they're on leave, leaving the company. So we talked about that. And while you're on leave, we're like, okay, what is the communication? How do you want that? Do you want check-ins? Do you want sort of total blackout time? How do you work with your manager during those times? And then what's your transition back? So you already, if you did all that planning up front, and we always say when you're planning up front, you're planning that you're going to leave a month before your actual due date to help fill in those who have preterm pregnancies, which is not uncommon to happen. So you have those triggers in place. Who provides that? But we also talk about how the managers need to also manage non-parents, because a lot of non-parents out there feel like so much is put on their shoulders, and they're doing a lot of extra work with no recognition, no extra pay for that. So we talk about how do managers work with that. So one of our things our company does is we coach both the manager and the employee go out. But part of the coaching with the manager is not just on the employee, but how do you manage the rest of the team? So you have an equitable response to the rest of the team. And then when that individual comes back, what is that process? Is it flexible? Is there a flexibility process? Is there travel involved? And what we start looking at is we want to make sure the communication, which is the biggest barrier, that typically when a woman comes back, the manager makes a lot of whether the manager male or female, will make a lot of good intent decisions for the mother. Now,
without including her, correct?
Without including her, right?
A very big theme, right?
Yes.
On my behalf, this was done, and I didn't ask for it.
Yeah, won't put her on those high-profile projects because she needs time for the kids. Won't give her any travel opportunities. All these things that can be a career killer, or at least slow your career down. But we're talking about, talk about those things and allow your employee to make those decisions with you, right? And so you can work them together. As we walk through that, and we walk through those 3 different phases. It's like, what can the manager do? What systemically can the organization do? And then as you as a parent on the leave, how can you own this leave? Especially if you're the majority of people who don't have that supportive manager or supportive sort of corporate presence. How can you own it so you can be a better self, a better employee at the end?
So if you're listening to this podcast, your organization is perhaps well-intended, yet not engage in the way that you two are describing. What were some of the things I can do to take myself through and be grounded in needing to start this? Is there something preemptively around, please don't, make decisions on my behalf? Please, is there some things that we'd want to just put on the table early on to try to avoid what might inevitably happen if we don't?
First of all, the most important thing is to have some awareness, right, of what's happening, right? And to look at the arc of the whole transition, right? And don't think about it as just like, I'm going to have a baby, and then when that day comes, I'm going to turn the switch off, walk out the door, and then I'll walk in and turn the switch back on. Have some awareness that this is a bigger transition. And I think you have to start some conversations with people that reflect where you are now and what your best thinking is, and engage with some trusted colleagues, hopefully your manager, in partnership, in conversations where your answers may change over time, right? To set a planning process in place is really important, but to know that what you want to do and what your goals are may shift a little bit over that time, but let people be in partnership with you. If you're in your head the whole time thinking about this and coming up with fantasies about what could go well or what could go badly, that's you need to test some of that stuff, we think.
Mason?
Yeah. The first thing, and this is a shameless plug, but the first thing I'm going to say is go to HR and ask HR, does our corporation want to support working parents? We hope the answer is yes. And we think it will be. Great. There's this new book. It's called The Parenthood Advantage. Could you order a couple copies, educate yourself, and connect yourself? So education, there's lots online. Our book is just one way of educating yourself. But, find others who've gone through this process already in your company. Reach out to them. Find out, what are some ways, have a coffee or lunch with them and just say, what are some tips you give me? What struggles did you have? What are some challenges? So there's 3 things that a company can do fairly easily. One is set up mentoring. So for parents those who've gone through it in the company and those who are going through it, it's quick, it's easy, it's fantastic. The second is establish an employee resource group for parenting. When people share like needs, it provides a automatic support. You're so drained as a parent. And it's so nice just to share sort of that feeling and what you're going through. It's a quick and intimate connection right away. And the third thing is coaching. I would say the fourth would be development, but coaching is huge. So coach and have the coaching for employees. And a lot of companies are going this way. They're providing that as a benefit for the employee to get that coaching and the manager at the same time. So those things are big. But, education is always the first and the foundational piece of that. So if you do those, I think you're along the way. And I'll say it again, own your leave. Do not expect your manager or your company to put everything out in front of you. If they do, great, and you can follow along. But if they don't, and it's a good chance, there's a 95% chance they won't, do it yourself. Own it. This can make you a better employee, a better person. I can tell personally, I feel like such a better person because of my kids. And I don't think there's a single person I've asked that would say differently. I'm sure, Kim, you think the same way. And it's just there, what happens to you. So you will, if you're listening to this and you're expecting a child, this can make you a better person, leverage it, and help your company to create that supportive culture.
Well, Mason and Mark, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I really appreciate you bringing this, the research you've done, the wisdom into the conversation for others to hear and feel like they have agency and choice in these areas that sometimes can feel very intimidating. So I appreciate it. I will encourage all our listeners to get your book. We'll also have links in the show notes as to how they can connect with you and be able to get more information and hopefully really engage with your services as well at the organizational level. Thank you both so much for being on Courage to Advance podcast.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kim. It's a pleasure.
For our listeners, we have free resources relevant to our conversation today that you can download by visiting 𝗀𝗄rage2advancepodcast.com, which will take you to our Spark Effect podcast page. Thank you for tuning in to our episode of Courage to Advance, where transformative leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about having the courage to find them.